The silence in my grandfather's house after he was gone wasn't really silence at all. It was the deafening absence of his shuffling slippers on the worn linoleum, the lack of his low, tuneless humming drifting from the kitchen, the hollow space where his easy chair sat, facing the garden he could no longer tend. It was August 21st, a Tuesday choked with late summer humidity. The air hung thick and still, smelling faintly of dust, old wood polish, and the lingering ghost of his pipe tobacco. Outside, the world buzzed with cicadas, a relentless, shimmering sound that felt like it was vibrating inside my own skull. I was adrift, 32 years old, suddenly the reluctant custodian of a life packed into 87 years' worth of faded photographs, mismatched china, and the heavy, sweet scent of grief. My own life, a small apartment and a job I tolerated in the city, felt galaxies away. Here, in this quiet, sun-drenched house on the edge of a town time seemed to have forgotten, I was just Liam, grandson, the one who visited holidays and sent postcards. Now, I was the one sorting sock drawers, finding half-finished crosswords, and trying not to drown in the sheer, overwhelming quiet of it all. The weight of his absence pressed down, a physical thing. Guilt, too, for all the visits I hadn't made, the stories I hadn't asked for. The crossroads I stood at wasn't about career or place, it was about how to carry this monumental, ordinary loss. And then there was Pearl. She wasn't my cat. She had never been anyone's cat, really, except his. Grandpa had found her years ago, a half-drowned scrap of matted gray fur huddled under the garden shed during a thunderstorm. "Pearl," he declared, "'cause she's a little treasure washed up rough." She was a small thing even now, compact and sturdy, her fur a soft, smoky gray threaded with silver, like wood ash. Her eyes, they were the startling green of new moss after rain, and held an unnerving depth. She moved through the house like a shadow given form, soundless, watchful. I'd seen her over the years during visits. She'd tolerate my presence, sometimes deigning to accept a chin scratch if Grandpa was nearby, radiating calm. But she was utterly, completely his. Her world orbited him. She'd trail him from kitchen to garden, a silent, gray satellite. She'd sleep curled on the arm of his chair, a warm, purring weight against his side as he read. Her loyalty was absolute, quiet, and fierce. Since I'd arrived 3 days ago, after the funeral, after the well-meaning neighbors had drifted away, Pearl had treated me like furniture. Necessary, perhaps, but utterly unremarkable. She'd vanish when I entered a room. If I sat on Grandpa's chair, his chair, she'd appear like a reproachful ghost from some unseen corner, fixing me with those unblinking green eyes before silently slipping away. She wouldn't eat if I put the food down. She'd only touch the kibble Grandpa had left in her bowl, or fresh offerings placed silently by Mrs. Henderson next door, who seemed to understand the delicate protocols of Pearl's grief. That Tuesday morning, the air already thick and sluggish, I was in the kitchen, trying to muster the energy to make coffee in Grandpa's ancient percolator. The silence pressed in, broken only by the frantic whir of a trapped fly against the window pane. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, dappling the faded linoleum floor. I leaned against the counter, staring at the empty chair at the small kitchen table, the chair where he'd sat every morning, reading the paper. Pearl often perched on the spare seat beside him, watching the birds outside. My throat felt tight, scratchy. The emptiness was a physical ache. A soft thump from the hallway made me start. I turned slowly. Pearl stood in the doorway, not slinking away, not hiding, just standing. Her smoky fur seemed to absorb the light. Her green eyes were fixed, not on me, but on the empty chair. Her posture wasn't hostile. It was profoundly still. A deep, aching stillness. Her tail didn't flick. Her ears were forward, not flattened. She just gazed at the space where he should have been. I held my breath, afraid any movement, any sound, would shatter this fragile moment or send her bolting. The trapped fly buzzed louder. The cicadas outside pulsed. My own heartbeat thudded in my ears. Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, Pearl lowered herself. Not into a crouch to flee, but down onto her haunches, then her belly, right there on the cool linoleum of the hallway. She tucked her paws neatly beneath her, her gaze never leaving the empty chair. She didn't look at me. She simply settled, as if keeping vigil, as if waiting. The weight of her quiet grief, mirroring my own chaotic, messy sorrow, hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't hostility I'd mistaken her silence for. It was devastation. A deep, wordless mourning for the center of her universe. She wasn't ignoring me. She was lost in the same vast, echoing absence that threatened to swallow me whole. I didn't move, didn't speak. The coffee forgotten, the fly ignored. We simply existed in that heavy, sunlit silence. The grieving grandson and the lost, gray cat, both staring at the empty space where love had lived. The quiet wasn't just absence anymore. It was a shared language, heavy with unshed tears, and the terrifying, fragile sense that something immense had irrevocably shifted. Not just in the house, but in the unseen landscape of two hearts. Pearl, who had followed only my grandfather yesterday, was now sharing her vigil with me. And in that shared silence, a tiny, almost imperceptible thread began to form, fragile as spider silk, connecting our separate pools of sorrow across the worn kitchen floor. The fragile truce born in the kitchen doorway didn't instantly bloom into companionship. It was more like the first tentative step onto thin ice. You hold your breath. You move slowly. You test every inch. The days after Pearl's vigil settled into a rhythm dictated by dust motes dancing in afternoon sunbeams and the profound quiet. I'd wake in the unfamiliar narrow bed in Grandpa's spare room, the one that always smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. The first sound wasn't birdsong, but the heavy silence, waiting to be broken. I'd pad down the creaking hallway, past the closed door of Grandpa's room, a door neither Pearl nor I had yet dared to open. And there she'd be, not greeting me, not even acknowledging my arrival, but present. Often, she'd be in the exact spot in the hallway, a small, smoky gray mound on the cool linoleum, her moss-green eyes fixed on the empty kitchen chair, as if her vigil was a shift she couldn't abandon. Other times, she'd be sitting primly on the windowsill in the living room, staring out at the overgrown garden Grandpa could no longer tend, the hollyhocks leaning drunkenly, the roses choked by weeds. Her stillness was absolute, a monument to waiting. My own grief was a messy, internal storm, guilt churning with sorrow, the overwhelming practicalities of sorting a lifetime tangling with sharp, unexpected memories. Finding his favorite chipped mug would send me reeling. The smell of his pipe tobacco lingering on an old sweater folded in a drawer could stop me dead in my tracks, breath catching. I felt unmoored, adrift in the very place that had always been his anchor. And Pearl, she was a silent reflection of that dislocation. Her world had collapsed. Mine felt like it was tilting. The first real shift came not with a purr or a headbutt, but with a bowl. Her food bowl. Grandpa had kept it meticulously clean, a small ceramic dish with little painted fish around the rim. It sat, empty and accusing, near the back door. Mrs. Henderson, bless her, had been leaving small pouches of Pearl's specific kibble on the back step. I'd brought one in, the rustling sound unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. Pearl, perched on the windowsill, didn't turn her head, but one ear swiveled back, a tiny radar dish picking up the signal. I filled the bowl, the kibble rattling like dry bones. Placed it carefully on the mat where Grandpa always put it. Then I retreated far back to the kitchen table, sat down slowly, and pretended to be engrossed in the meaningless swirls of the old Formica pattern. My heart thumped against my ribs. For long minutes, nothing. The only sound was the insistent buzz of a fly trapped somewhere and my own shallow breathing. Then, a soft thump as Pearl landed silently on the floor. She didn't look at me. She walked, not with her usual shadow-quick glide, but with a deliberate slowness, towards the bowl. She stopped a foot away, sniffed the air. Her gaze flickered, not to the food, but to the empty chair beside the table. A low sound escaped her, not quite a meow, more like a tiny, questioning chirp, directed at the emptiness. My throat tightened. She was asking him, confirming if this offering from this stranger in his house was acceptable. The loneliness in that small sound, the ingrained habit of seeking his approval, was almost unbearable. She looked at the bowl again. Then, hesitantly, she took one step forward. Another. She lowered her head, sniffed the kibble cautiously, as if expecting a trick. One delicate bite. The pause. Chewing slowly. Then another bite. She ate, deliberately, methodically, her body tense, angled slightly away from me. Not relaxed. Not trusting. But eating. The food I had put down. It was a victory so small, so fraught with shared sorrow, that tears pricked hotly behind my eyes. I didn't move. Didn't dare breathe too loudly. I just watched the small gray cat eat, the rhythmic crunch of kibble, suddenly the most important sound in the world. It wasn't affection. It wasn't bonding. It was survival. A tiny, necessary acceptance of the changed reality from both of us. After that, the ice thickened millimeter by millimeter. Pearl stopped vanishing immediately when I entered a room. She might still be on the windowsill or keeping her hallway vigil, but she'd stay. Her eyes would track me, wary, unblinking, but she wouldn't flee. I started talking to her. Softly. Nonsense mostly. Morning, Pearl. Sun's out again. Think we should tackle those hollyhocks today? She never responded, not with a meow or a flick of the tail. But sometimes, just sometimes, when I'd mention Grandpa or the garden, her ears would twitch, minutely, as if the sound of certain words carried a faint, familiar echo. I began to notice her routines. The way she meticulously cleaned her paws after stepping on the dusty porch. The precise spot on the living room rug where a patch of late afternoon sun would fall, and how she'd curl there, a compact circle of fur, soaking in the warmth. The soft, almost inaudible chirp she'd make when a particularly bold sparrow landed on the bird feeder outside the window. She wasn't playful. There was no kittenish energy left in her. Her movements were economical, deliberate, conserving energy, conserving feeling. One afternoon, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of stuff in the cluttered study, I sank into Grandpa's armchair, the big, worn leather one by the fireplace. His chair, the scent of him, pipe smoke, old wool, a hint of the liniment he used for his arthritis, rose from the leather as I sat. It was too much. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, crashed over me. I dropped my head into my hands, the worn leather cool against my forehead, the familiar smell a cruel comfort. A sob escaped me, rough and ugly in the quiet room. I didn't hear her come in, but I felt it, a shift in the air. I lifted my head, wiping hastily at my eyes. Pearl stood a few feet away, staring at me. Not at the chair, her green eyes were wide, unreadable. But she wasn't judging. She looked watchful. Then, she did something extraordinary. She didn't jump onto the chair with me. She didn't rub against my legs. Instead, she walked slowly towards the hearth rug, the one that had always lain in front of Grandpa's chair. She circled it once, twice, a slow, deliberate ritual. Then she settled down. Not curled up facing away, but lying on her belly, her front paws tucked neatly under her chest, her head up. She was facing me. Her gaze, still intense, still unnerving, was fixed directly on my face. She didn't purr. She didn't blink slowly. She just sat, present, a silent sentinel, witnessing my breakdown, acknowledging it. It wasn't comfort in the way a human would offer it. There was no pat on the back, no murmured words. It was feline, quiet, undemanding. She had chosen to be there, in the space that had always been hers near him, while I sat in his place, drowning. She wasn't offering solace, she was sharing the space of sorrow. Her own profound loss, a silent echo to mine. Later that day, emboldened by her presence on the rug, I tried something else. Grandpa's old cardigan, the soft, gray one he wore constantly in the house, still hung on the back of the kitchen door. I lifted it down carefully. It held his scent powerfully, a complex tapestry of tobacco, wood smoke, and just him. Pearl, sitting in her patch of hallway sun, lifted her head as I approached. I didn't try to touch her with it. Instead, I slowly, so slowly, lowered the cardigan onto the floor. Near her, but not too close. I placed it gently, a folded square of worn wool. Then I stepped back, sat on the floor myself, leaning against the wall, giving her space. She watched the cardigan, not me. Her nostrils flared, delicately, sampling the air. A low rumble started in her chest, so quiet I almost missed it. Not a purr of contentment, but a deeper, vibrational sound, almost like a groan of recognition, of longing. She inched forward, nose extended. She sniffed the wool, tentatively at first, then burying her face into the folds. She rubbed her cheek against it vigorously, marking it, claiming the scent. Then she did something that shattered me. She climbed onto it, curled herself into a tight ball, right on top of the cardigan, burying her nose into the fabric. A soft, shuddering sigh escaped her, a sound of such profound, weary, aching relief that it echoed the sigh I'd been holding in my own chest for days. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since I'd arrived, Pearl slept deeply, not just rested, but slept, wrapped in the ghost of his scent. I sat on the floor, watching her, the late afternoon sun warming the linoleum, the scent of dust and old wood and grief thick in the air. The distance between us, the grieving grandson leaning against the wall, and the small gray cat curled on her lost human's scent, felt vast. Yet, it also felt infinitesimally smaller than it had been just days before. We weren't friends. We were fellow travelers, shipwrecked on the same desolate shore of loss, learning, tentatively, painfully, how to share the space, how to read the silent language of shared sorrow. The thread between us, spun from shared meals, witnessed tears, and the sacred scent of memory, was no longer spider silk. It was stronger now. A lifeline, thin, perhaps, but real. And in the quiet rhythm of her breathing, curled on that worn gray wool, I felt the first fragile stirring of something other than emptiness. The quiet, terrifying warmth of not being entirely alone. The fragile understanding woven from shared grief and Grandpa's cardigan didn't erase the silence. It just changed its texture. The house still held its breath. The garden still sprawled, untamed and poignant. But now, there were two heartbeats navigating the quiet, sometimes in parallel, sometimes tentatively intersecting. Pearl's routines became my compass. Her morning vigil by the empty chair, her precise positioning in the afternoon sun patch, her silent patrols past the still-closed door of Grandpa's bedroom. That door loomed, a physical manifestation of the loss I wasn't ready to face. Packing away chipped mugs and worn sweaters was one thing. Entering the room where he'd taken his last breath felt like trespassing on sacred, sorrowful ground. Pearl seemed to feel the same. She'd pause outside it, her nose almost touching the worn wood, her body utterly still, listening. Then she'd move on, her tail giving a single, decisive flick, as if dismissing an impossible thought. Our interactions remained wordless, built on small, practical gestures. I'd fill her bowl, she'd eat, sometimes while I sat nearby, sometimes only after I'd retreated to another room. I started placing Grandpa's cardigan on the living room rug in the evenings, near his chair. She'd always find it, curl onto it, bury her face, and sink into a deeper sleep than she managed anywhere else. Once, only once, as I sat reading in the dim lamplight, she stretched out a single gray paw, just far enough to rest the very tips of her claws, gently, on the toe of my slipper. It lasted only seconds before she retracted it, but the contact, deliberate, tentative, sent a jolt of warmth through me that had nothing to do with the radiator. The garden became a neutral territory. It felt less saturated with his immediate presence, more a living thing he'd loved that now needed tending. I started small, pulling weeds choking the rose bushes near the back porch. Pearl watched from the kitchen windowsill, her green eyes tracking my movements. One crisp September morning, I left the back door ajar, letting the cool air and the scent of damp earth drift in. I was wrestling with a stubborn bindweed root, sweat prickling my temples, when I felt it. A presence. Not threatening. Just that. I looked up. Pearl sat on the top porch step, perfectly composed, her smoky fur blending with the weathered gray wood. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed on the overgrown flower bed, the one where Grandpa used to grow fat, fragrant peonies. A bold robin was hopping nearby, pecking at the disturbed soil. Pearl's tail twitched, the very tip once. But she didn't pounce, didn't even tense for a spring. She just watched, absorbing the scene, the robin, the mess I was making, the lingering ghost of peonies. Then, slowly, deliberately she stood, descended the steps with her usual silent grace. She didn't approach me. She walked past, close enough that I caught the faint, clean scent of her fur, and headed towards the old shed tucked into the corner of the garden. She stopped by its weathered door, set, and began meticulously cleaning her front paw, as if this spot, this specific patch of mossy ground, was exactly where she intended to be. It became a pattern. On mornings I gardened, she'd appear. Sometimes on the step, sometimes near the shed, always maintaining a careful distance, but present, a silent, furry supervisor. It was oddly comforting. Her quiet company, her apparent interest, made the overwhelming task of reclaiming Grandpa's garden feel less lonely, less like an erasure, and more like a continuation. A shared project undertaken in wordless tandem. But the peace, the fragile rhythm we were building, was about to fracture. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. I began noticing Pearl wasn't always on her cardigan when I went to bed, or on the hallway floor at dawn. The house was small. I'd check the living room rug, the windowsills, the patch of sun when it appeared. Sometimes she was simply gone, vanished into the quiet shadows. I'd find her later, curled in a basket of clean laundry I'd left in the spare room, or tucked behind the sofa. It felt restless, an unease beneath her usual stillness. Then the sound started. I'd be lying awake in the narrow bed, the silence pressing in, listening to the old house settle. And I'd hear it, not loud, not alarming, but persistent, a soft, rhythmic scritch, 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 like claws, very gently, deliberate scratching against wood or wallpaper. It would last for a minute, maybe two, then stop. Absolute silence would descend again. The first few times, I dismissed it, an old house noise. Mice in the attic? But it was too regular, too localized. It seemed to come from the same general area, near the front of the house, close to Loy's room. One night, restless myself, I got up. The floorboards creaked under my bare feet. I stood in the dark hallway, listening intently. The sound stopped instantly, as if sensing my presence. I waited, minutes ticking by in the oppressive dark, hearing only my own heartbeat. Nothing. I crept back to bed, feeling foolish, unsettled. The next day, during a rare moment of determined bravery, I decided to finally tackle the surface clutter outside Grandpa's bedroom door. A stack of old magazines, a leaning tower of cardboard boxes filled with who knew. As I shifted a particularly heavy box, something fluttered to the floor behind it. Not a magazine. A photograph. Black and white, faded at the edges. It showed Grandpa, impossibly young, grinning broadly, his arms slung around the shoulders of a woman I barely recognized. Granny Martha. She died when I was very small, a gentle presence I remembered mostly through Grandpa's quiet stories and the scent of lavender. In the photo, she was laughing, her eyes crinkled at the corners, her hand resting lightly on the head of a large, shaggy dog sitting obediently at their feet. Pearl appeared as if summoned. She didn't approach the photo. She sat a few feet away, watching me pick it up. Her green eyes, usually so focused on middle distance or empty chairs, were fixed on the picture in my hands. Intensely, unblinking. Her tail wasn't twitching now. It lay perfectly still, a gray rope on the floorboards. Granny Martha, I murmured, more to myself than to her. And old Duke, remember him? Grandpa always said he was the best dog. Pearl didn't react to the names. But her gaze, it felt deeper, more penetrating, as if she wasn't just seeing the photo, but recognizing something within it. Something beyond the image itself. She made a soft sound, not a chirp, not a meow, a low, almost humming vibration in her throat. Then, slowly, deliberate, she turned her head and looked directly at Grandpa's closed bedroom door. Not just a glance, a stare, sustained, intense, as if trying to see through the wood. The coincidence, the timing, sent a prickle down my spine. Was she connecting the photo, the past, to the room? Was the scratching sound somehow related? Or was I, sleep-deprived and drowning in grief, projecting meaning onto a cat's random behaviors? The scratching sounds continued, night after night, always stopping when I investigated, always near that door. Pearl's restlessness grew. She'd spend longer periods sitting outside the bedroom, not just pausing, but sitting, staring at the door handle. Her expression was unreadable, but the intensity of her focus was unnerving. It felt purposeful, obsessive. One rainy afternoon, the gray light leaching the color from everything, I finally noticed something else. Near the baseboard, just beside the door frame to Grandpa's room, the faded floral wallpaper was damaged. A small patch, maybe the size of my palm, where the pattern was blurred, the paper slightly frayed. It looked rubbed, like something had been persistently brushing against it, or scratching near it over and over. I knelt down, ran my fingertips over the spot. It felt different, smoother, yet oddly rough beneath the surface wear. My heart started a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. Pearl appeared silently beside me. She didn't look at me. She looked at the worn patch on the wall. Then slowly, deliberately, she lifted her front paw, extended a single claw, and gently tapped it against the damaged wallpaper. Twice. Precisely where the wear was worst. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't destructive. It was deliberate, communicative, a confirmation. The breath caught in my throat. This wasn't random restlessness. This wasn't just grief manifesting as pacing. This was something else. A pattern. A focus. Pearl was fixated on this spot, beside the door to the room we both avoided, and she was trying to tell me something. Or show me something. Her green eyes lifted from the wall, met mine. They held no fear. Only a deep, unwavering, almost demanding intensity. It was a look that bypassed language, bypassed species, and went straight to the core of shared bewilderment, and a rising, unspoken question that vibrated in the damp, silent air. What is here? The tension wasn't about the scratching anymore. It was about the why. The closed door suddenly felt less like a boundary of grief, and more like a locked box. And Pearl, this small, grieving cat, seemed to hold a key I couldn't scratching not just at the wallpaper, but at the surface of a mystery neither of us fully understood. The fragile piece we'd built in the garden, over shared meals, on the scent-soaked cardigan, trembled. The quiet house no longer felt like just a vessel for absence. It felt charged, waiting, holding its breath for the next inevitable scratch in the dark, or the next terrifying step towards opening the door neither of us could bring ourselves to face. The shared sorrow was now tangled with a sharp, coiling thread of suspense. What secret, what memory, what tangible piece of him lay hidden behind that worn patch of wallpaper, or locked within the room Pearl stared at with such fierce, silent longing? The mystery and the rising dread of confronting it settled over us both, thick as the autumn rain drumming against the windows. The rain didn't let up. It drummed against the roof, a constant, gray murmur, turning the garden into a watercolor blur outside the windows. Inside, the air felt thick, heavy with damp and the unresolved tension coiling around that worn patch of wallpaper and the door it guarded. Pearl's restlessness became a tangible thing. She'd pace short, tight circuits in the hallway, pausing each time to stare at the bedroom door or to gently, deliberate scratch at the damaged wallpaper. Her green eyes held none of their earlier watchful stillness. They burned with a quiet, desperate intensity, a silent plea I couldn't decipher, but couldn't ignore. I tried distraction. I brought Grandpa's cardigan out earlier, placed it in her favorite sun patch. She ignored it. I opened a fresh pouch of her kibble, the sound usually irresistible. She glanced towards the kitchen, hesitated, then turned back to the door. A low, continuous rumble vibrated in her chest now, not a purr, but a sound of deep, persistent unease. It filled the spaces between the rain's rhythm, a bass note of feline anxiety that grated on my already frayed nerves. The worn patch on the wall, Pearl's relentless focus, it felt like an accusation. "What are you waiting for?" It seemed to whisper. "What are you afraid to find?" My own grief had been a heavy blanket, smothering but familiar. This was a splinter under the skin. A constant, nagging presence demanding attention. The mystery Pearl embodied, her wordless insistence, was forcing me out of passive mourning towards an action I dreaded. 3 days passed. 3 days of rain, of Pearl's pacing and scratching, of me jumping at every creak in the old house, my sleep fractured by the sound of phantom claws on wood. The closed door began to feel less like a boundary, and more like a wall I was building myself, brick by brick of cowardice. What was I protecting? His privacy? Or myself, from the finality, the intimate details of his absence contained within that room? Pearl, with her ancient, knowing eyes, seemed to sense my internal conflict. Her stares grew longer, more penetrating. She'd sit directly in front of the door, blocking it, her small body a determined barricade against my hesitation. The breaking point came on the 4th rain-sodden afternoon. I was attempting to sort through a box of Grandpa's old tools in the shed, seeking refuge in tangible, unemotional objects. The damp chill seeped into my bones. Pearl had followed me, not to supervise, but because the tension inside the house had become unbearable for both of us. She sat on an upturned bucket, watching the rain sheet down outside the open shed door, her fur fluffed slightly against the cold. Her usual composure was gone. She looked diminished, worn thin by her own silent vigil. A sudden, sharp crack of thunder split the sky, startlingly close. The shed lights flickered, then died. In the sudden gloom, Pearl didn't startle. She didn't yowl or bolt. Instead, she turned her head slowly, deliberately, and looked straight at me. In the half-light, her green eyes seemed to glow, holding an expression of such profound, sorrowful knowing that it stopped my breath. It wasn't fear. It was resignation. And beneath it, a flicker of something else, an ancient, patient sadness that seemed to transcend this moment, this shed, this rain. Then, without a sound, she jumped down from the bucket. She didn't head for the house. She walked towards the back corner of the shed, to the old, scarred workbench Grandpa had built decades ago. Dust motes danced in the sliver of gray light from the doorway. Pearl stopped beside a stack of weathered paint cans, tucked almost out of sight. She looked at the cans, then back at me. Her tail gave one slow, decisive sweep across the dusty concrete floor. A command. My heart hammered against my ribs. This felt different. Not the hallway scratching, not the door staring. This was specific, purposeful. I approached slowly, the smell of damp earth, old wood, and turpentine thick in the air. Pearl watched me, unmoving. I moved the top paint can, heavy and cold. Then the next. Behind them, nestled against the rough brick wall, lay something small and metallic. An old key, tarnished silver, slightly bent, attached to a simple, braided leather loop. Recognition slammed into me. Grandpa's shed key? No, the shed padlock was newer, bigger. This key was smaller, more delicate. Pearl nudged it with her nose, A soft, insistent push. Then she looked at me again, her gaze unwavering, holding mine with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "Take this." I picked it up. The metal was cold, the leather loop worn smooth by time. What did it unlock? A toolbox? An old trunk? Pearl turned and walked out of the shed into the slanting rain. She didn't run for cover. She walked head down, tail low, straight towards the back door of the house. Waiting. I followed, the key clenched in my damp palm, feeling like I was holding a live wire. Back inside, the house felt charged, expectant. Water dripped from my jacket onto the linoleum. Pearl stood, dripping, in the hallway. Not looking at the worn wallpaper patch. Not looking at the door. She was looking directly at the tall, narrow dresser that stood against the wall opposite Grandpa's bedroom door. An old, dark oak piece, cluttered with framed photos, a dusty ceramic spaniel, and a bowl for keys. Grandpa's everyday keys were there, but Pearl's gaze was fixed, unblinking, on the top drawer. The only drawer with a keyhole. My legs felt weak. I walked to the dresser, the key in my hand suddenly heavy as lead. Pearl didn't move. She sat, water beading on her smoky fur, her eyes fixed on the drawer, her body radiating a tense stillness. The air crackled. The rain outside seemed to hush, holding its breath. I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. A soft, metallic click echoed in the silent hallway, unnaturally loud. I turned it. The mechanism resisted, stiff with disuse, then yielded with a reluctant groan. I pulled the drawer open. It wasn't filled with documents, or valuables, or secrets of a scandalous past. It was sparse, holding only a few items resting on a bed of faded velvet. My breath caught. On top lay a simple, tarnished silver locket. I recognized it instantly. Granny Martha's. She'd worn it always. Beneath it, a small, folded square of linen, yellowed with age, embroidered with tiny, faded violets. Her handkerchief. The scent, faint, almost ghostly, but unmistakable, lavender, rose up from the fabric. And beneath that, a bundle of letters, tied with a frayed blue ribbon. Addressed to Grandpa, in Granny Martha's looping, graceful handwriting. But it was what lay beside them, what Pearl had somehow known was there, that shattered me. A small, worn leather collar. Too big for Pearl. Thick, sturdy, with a round, brass tag attached. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. The tag was deeply engraved, the brass worn smooth in places. One side, Duke. The other, if found, return to J. Henderson, 17 Oak Lane. The shaggy dog from the photograph. Grandpa's constant companion, before Pearl, before I was even born. The dog Granny Martha's hand rested on in that image of youthful happiness. I remembered Grandpa mentioning him, rarely, always with a distant look in his eyes, a slight catch in his voice. He was a good lad, he'd say. Gone too soon. A choked sob escaped me. Not just for Grandpa, not just for Granny Martha, but for Duke. For the layers of loss this drawer represented. The locket Martha wore, the handkerchief she carried, the letters she wrote, the collar of the dog they both loved. Kept here, separate, sacred, in a locked drawer near the room where he'd spent his final days. His most private grief, his most cherished memories, guarded. A soft sound, a tiny, broken mule, came from the floor. I looked down. Pearl was standing on her hind legs, her front paws resting lightly on the edge of the open drawer. She wasn't looking at the locket, or the letters, or even Duke's collar. Her nose, her entire being, was focused on the folded linen handkerchief. She inhaled deeply, shudderingly, her small ribs expanding. The scent of lavender, Granny Martha's scent, a scent from decades before Pearl was even born. Then, she did something that broke my heart wide open. She didn't try to take it. She didn't rub against it. Slowly, tremblingly, she stretched her neck forward and gently, oh so gently, pressed the top of her head, her forehead, against the embroidered violets on the handkerchief. She held it there, perfectly still, for a long, suspended moment. A soft, ragged sigh, almost a whimper, escaped her. It was a gesture of such profound, ancient recognition, of pure, unadulterated sorrow, that it transcended species. She was smelling her person's person, the source of his deepest love, and therefore, the source of her deepest loss. She understood, not intellectually, but in her bones, in her feline soul. She understood the depth of the love that had shaped the man she adored, and the magnitude of the void his passing had left, a void that stretched back through years, through lifetimes, through collars and lockets and embroidered violets. Her small body sagged. She lowered herself back to all fours, her head hanging low, her tail limp on the floor. She looked emptied. The frantic energy, the obsessive scratching, the desperate searching, it all drained out of her, leaving behind only a quiet, devastating exhaustion. She turned slowly and walked away from the open drawer, away from the relics of a love story that predated her. She walked past Grandpa's closed bedroom door without a glance. She walked down the hallway towards the living room and crawled, slowly, heavily, onto his worn cardigan lying on the rug. She curled into the tightest possible ball, burying her face deep into the familiar scent of wool and pipe smoke, the scent that was him. A single, shuddering breath racked her small frame. Then stillness. Complete, utter stillness. I sank to my knees in the hallway, the brass dog tag clutched in one hand, the faint scent of lavender clinging to the other. The tears came then, not the choked sobs from before, but a silent, relentless river. For Grandpa, for Granny Martha, for Duke, for the lifetimes of love and loss contained in that small drawer. And for Pearl, this small, fierce creature whose world had revolved around one man, who had somehow sensed the echoes of his past sorrows, and whose silent, persistent grief had led us both, finally, to this moment of shattering understanding. The mystery wasn't supernatural. It wasn't sinister. It was human. Profoundly, achingly human. A man guarding the tangible remnants of his deepest loves, locking away the physical touchstones of his heartbreak. And a cat whose bond with him was so absolute, so instinctually deep, that she felt the lingering resonance of that guarded pain, and tried, in her wordless, scratching way, to point me towards it, to share the burden, to find the key. The rain continued its soft drumming on the roof. The drawer stood open, the past laid bare. Pearl slept, a small, gray monument to exhaustion on the cardigan. And I knelt on the cold hallway floor, surrounded by the ghosts of love, finally understanding the true depth of the silence in my grandfather's house. It wasn't just his absence. It was the echo of all the absences he had carried, locked away, but never forgotten. Pearl had known. And now, so did I. The breaking point wasn't an end. It was a terrible, necessary opening of the heart, letting the buried sorrow finally breathe. In the shared, rain-washed silence, the rain stopped. Not dramatically, but gradually, the drumming on the roof softening to a patter, then a drip. Nothing. The silence that followed wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of before. It was different, lighter, cleansed, like the world itself had taken a deep, shuddering breath and exhaled. Sunlight, pale and tentative after days of gray, began to filter through the lace curtains. It caught the dust motes dancing in the hallway, illuminating the open drawer, the worn patch of wallpaper, and Pearl, a small, motionless mound on Grandpa's cardigan. She hadn't moved since collapsing onto it. Her breathing was deep, rhythmic, the sleep of utter exhaustion. The frantic energy, the desperate searching, the silent, vibrating anxiety was gone. In its place was a profound stillness, not the watchful stillness of grief, but the stillness of surrender. She had shown me the key, she had witnessed the heartbreak, and now she was spent. I remained on my knees for a long time, the cool linoleum seeping into my bones. The brass dog tag was warm in my palm now, the engraving of Duke's name a tangible echo. The scent of lavender from Granny Martha's handkerchief, so faint, seemed to linger in the air, mingling strangely with the familiar pipe smoke from the cardigan Pearl slept on. It wasn't oppressive anymore. It was layered, complex. A tapestry of love and loss woven over decades, finally aired out. I carefully closed the drawer, leaving it unlocked. The key I placed gently beside the ceramic spaniel on the dresser, no longer hidden, no longer guarding secrets. Just present, acknowledged, moving slowly. I gathered the damp towels we tracked in, mopped up the puddles near the door. Ordinary tasks. Grounding. The house felt changed. The walls seemed to breathe easier. The closed door to Grandpa's bedroom, it still loomed, but the dread surrounding it had shifted. It wasn't a locked box of unbearable finality anymore, but a room. Just a room. Where a good man had lived and loved and finally slept. The weight of avoiding it, the power it held over both Pearl and me, had dissolved in the rain-washed aftermath of the drawer's revelation. Pearl slept through the afternoon. Deeply, peacefully. I made tea. The familiar ritual in Grandpa's chipped mug feeling less like an act of trespass and more like continuity. I sat at the kitchen table, the one where he'd read his paper, and watched her. The tight coil of tension that had defined her small body for weeks was gone. She was relaxed, limp, her face buried in the wool, rising and falling with each slow breath. It was the first time she'd looked at ease since I'd arrived. When she finally stirred, as the late afternoon sun slanted gold across the living room rug, it was gradual. A slow stretch, paws extending, claws flexing, a deep, luxurious yawn that showed tiny pink gums and needle-sharp teeth. She blinked, slowly, her green eyes clearing from sleep. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, gazing around the room. Then her eyes settled on me, sitting at the table. There was no wariness, no flicker of reproach or distance. Just recognition. A quiet acknowledgement. She stretched again, then settled back onto the cardigan, tucking her paws neatly beneath her. But this time, she didn't bury her face. She rested her chin on her paws, her gaze drifting towards the window, watching the light play on the wet leaves of the overgrown hollyhocks. Present. The next morning, the world felt scrubbed clean. The air was crisp, carrying the damp, earthy scent of autumn and the faint tang of decaying leaves. I woke, not to the weight of dread, but to a quiet sense of possibility. A fragile peace. I padded down the hallway. Pearl wasn't on the cardigan. She wasn't keeping vigil by the empty chair. She was sitting neatly by her food bowl, looking at it, then looking at me. A direct, expectant gaze. I filled it, the kibble rattling cheerfully in the sudden quiet. She didn't wait for me to retreat. She lowered her head and began to eat. Calmly, methodically. No tension in her shoulders. No angling away. Just eating. When she finished, she sat back, licked her chops meticulously, then walked over to where I stood near the counter. She didn't rub against my legs. She didn't meow. She simply sat down near my feet and began washing her face. A slow, thorough, utterly ordinary ritual. The proximity, the casualness of it, felt monumental. A shared space, no longer charged with grief or mystery, just shared existence. Later, emboldened by the sunlight and the quiet shift in the air, I walked down the hallway, past the unlocked drawer, past the worn patch of wallpaper. I stopped outside Grandpa's bedroom door. Pearl appeared silently beside me. She didn't stare at the door. She didn't scratch the wall. Looking up at the handle, slowly, she looked at me. Her green eyes held no demand. No intensity. Just a quiet question. But I took a deep breath. The scent of old wood, dust, and yes, the faintest ghost of him, liniment and wool. I reached out, turned the cold brass knob, and pushed the door open. Sunlight flooded the room. Dust danced in the beams. It was exactly as he'd left it. Sparse. The bed neatly made with the faded quilt Granny Martha had stitched. His reading glasses on the nightstand, beside a half-finished library book. A pair of slippers tucked neatly by the wardrobe. The window looked out over the tangled garden. It smelled not of sickness or death, but of quiet solitude and him. I stepped inside. Pearl hesitated on the threshold, just for a second. Then she followed, not rushing ahead, deliberate, her tail held high, but relaxed. She went straight to the bed, sniffed the quilt near the pillow, where his head would have lain. She didn't climb up. She just smelled deeply. Then she turned and walked to the patch of sunlight pooling on the worn rug near the window. She circled once, slowly, deliberately, and settled down, curling into a soft gray circle, facing the garden. She closed her eyes. A soft sigh escaped her, a sound of pure, uncomplicated contentment. She wasn't waiting for him here. She was remembering him, peacefully, at home. I stood in the center of the room, breathing in the quiet. The grief was still there, a familiar ache in my chest. But it wasn't sharp or drowning. It was integrated, woven into the fabric of the room, into the memory of the man who had lived here. I touched the quilt, smoothed a wrinkle on the pillow. I picked up his reading glasses, folded them, placed them back on the nightstand. Small acts of tenderness, not erasure, but caretaking. Over the next few days, a new rhythm emerged. Pearl still slept on Grandpa's cardigan, but now it was often dragged into different rooms, wherever the best sun patch happened to be. She followed me, not like a silent shadow, but with a quiet companionship. If I sat on the sofa, she might eventually jump up, not on my lap, but nearby, curling into her own space. If I gardened, she'd often find a sunny spot on the porch or near the shed, watching the birds with lazy interest, occasionally chirping, but never with the old intensity. She began using the cat flap Mrs. Henderson had installed years ago, venturing into the garden for short explorations, always returning. Her world, once collapsed into a single point of devastating loss, was slowly, carefully expanding again. I tackled the garden with a new sense of purpose. Not as a chore, but as a connection. I pruned the roses, cleared the bindweed, discovered brave little violets pushing through near the peony bed. Pearl supervised, often from a comfortable distance, sometimes venturing closer to sniff a freshly turned clod of earth or watch a worm wriggle. Once, as I wrestled with a particularly stubborn root, I felt a soft pressure against my leg. Just briefly, her warm flank solid against my calf, before moving away to investigate a fallen leaf. It wasn't affection, exactly. It was presence. Solidarity. A silent "I'm here." The decision about the house, which had felt like an impossible weight, began to clarify. Selling it, boxing everything up, felt wrong. Like severing the last tangible thread. But staying forever trapped in this beautiful, bittersweet memorial wasn't right either. I thought of the drawer, unlocked now. The locket, the handkerchief, Duke's collar, the letters. Not locked away, but present, honored. Part of the story, not the whole story. One crisp October morning, the air sharp with the promise of frost. I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh notebook. Pearl was in her sun patch on the living room rug, a soft gray comma of contentment. I picked up a pen, not to make lists of belongings or contact realtors. I started writing about Grandpa, about Granny Martha, about Duke, the shaggy dog whose collar now sat, respectfully, beside a framed photo of him on the dresser, about the smell of pipe smoke and lavender, the sound of tuneless humming, the feel of worn leather under my hands, about the small, smoky gray cat who had taught me, in her silent, persistent way, that grief isn't a solitary cage, but a landscape we navigate, sometimes alone, sometimes finding unexpected companions along the way. As I wrote, the words flowing, Pearl stirred. She stretched, yawned, and padded softly into the kitchen. She didn't go to her bowl. She walked over to me, stopped by my chair. She looked up, her green eyes clear, calm. Then slowly, deliberately, she lifted a single front paw and placed it gently on my knee. Not demanding attention, not asking for food, just for resting it there. A warm, solid weight. A quiet point of contact. Her gaze held mine for a long moment, a look of deep, peaceful understanding. Then she blinked, slowly, deliberately, a cat's kiss, and lowered her paw, turning to walk back towards her sunbeam. I sat very still, the warmth of her tiny paw print lingering on my knee. The silence in the house was no longer an absence. It was a presence. A gentle hum, woven from sunlight, rustling leaves, the scratch of my pen, the soft rhythm of a cat's breathing, and the quiet, enduring echo of love, past and present. The choice wasn't about leaving or staying, not yet. It was about carrying this place, this peace, this layered, complicated love forward. However I could. With Pearl, this small, fierce guardian of memory, walking quietly beside me. The mystery was solved, the grief acknowledged, the silence, finally, filled with something softer, stronger than sorrow. It was filled with the quiet pulse of life continuing. Autumn deepened, painting the world in fiery gold and russet. The air grew sharp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a crisp counterpoint to the lingering warmth inside Grandpa's house. The place no longer felt like a museum of absence, but a lived-in space, breathing with a new, quieter rhythm. Pearl's smoky gray fur seemed thicker now, threaded with more silver, catching the low autumn light like tarnished pewter. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, radiating a calm that felt hard-won and deeply settled. Our routines solidified. Mornings began with coffee for me, kibble for her, often consumed in companionable silence near the kitchen window, watching frost etch patterns on the glass. She'd follow me on garden rounds, not as a supervisor, but as a quiet presence, sometimes batting at a falling leaf, sometimes simply sitting sentinel on the old garden bench Grandpa had built, the wood gray and weathered like her fur. Her favorite spot remained Grandpa's cardigan, now permanently residing on the living room rug, a well-worn island of familiar scent. She'd curl there for hours, eyes half closed, a soft, contented rumble vibrating in her chest, a sound like distant thunder, comforting and deep. One chilly afternoon, as I sorted through a box of Grandpa's old gardening gloves, Pearl hopped onto the table beside me. This was new. Not nearby, but beside me. She sniffed curiously at a worn leather glove, then turned and began meticulously washing a front paw, utterly unconcerned by my proximity. As she stretched, the soft leather of her collar, the simple one she'd worn since Grandpa found her, caught the light. It was looking tired, frayed at the edges, the buckles slightly tarnished. A small, practical thing, yet seeing it worn, triggered a thought. The drawer. The unlocked drawer holding the fragile relics of Grandpa's past loves. I hadn't opened it since that rain-soaked afternoon of revelation. The items inside felt too sacred, too intimately tied to his private heartache, for casual handling. But now, looking at Pearl's frayed collar, an idea sparked. Quiet, tentative, but persistent. Later, with Pearl drowsing in her sunbeam, I approached the dresser. The key still lay beside the ceramic spaniel, no longer a secret, just a piece of metal. My hand hovered over the drawer handle. A flicker of the old apprehension, the sense of trespass, brushed against me. Then I glanced at Pearl, peaceful, solid here. She had led me to this. She had shared his deepest silence. Maybe this wasn't trespass, but tending. I pulled the drawer open. The scent of lavender, faint but unmistakable, rose again. Granny Martha's locket lay there, tarnished silver, cool to the touch. The tiny clasp was stiff, but with careful pressure, it opened. Inside, nestled against faded velvet, were two tiny, black and white photographs. One of Grandpa Young, grinning with a carefree ease I barely recognized. The other, Granny Martha, her eyes bright, her smile wide and unguarded. Love, captured in miniature, pressed close together in the silver heart. I held it, the metal warming in my palm. It felt heavy, not just with metal, but with time, with joy, with loss. Grandpa had carried this close to his own heart for years. Then he'd locked it away, guarding the physical manifestation of a pain too deep for words. Until Pearl, in her feline wisdom, had scratched at the surface, demanding it be seen, shared, acknowledged. Looking at the locket, then at Pearl's worn collar, the idea crystallized. Not to keep the locket locked away, a hidden artifact of sorrow, but to use it, to let it serve again. Not as a pendant for human skin, but as a token, a bridge. It took careful work. A trip to the hardware store in town for tiny jump rings and pliers. Back at the kitchen table, with Pearl watching curiously from her cardigan island, I carefully detached the worn brass tag from her collar. It simply said, Pearl. Grandpa's handwriting, precise and familiar. I held it for a moment, a small, tangible piece of his love for her. Then, with fingers that trembled slightly, I attached a sturdy jump ring to the top of Granny Martha's locket. I threaded it onto Pearl's collar, beside her name tag. The tarnished silver heart, with its hidden treasure of youthful love, nestled against the worn leather, right beside the simple brass declaration of her name. Pearl watched the process, her green eyes following my hands, but showing no alarm. When I approached her, holding the collar, she stood, stretched languidly, and presented her neck with a quiet trust that stole my breath. I fastened the buckle, the locket settling against her chest cool for a moment, then warming quickly against her skin. She shook her head slightly, a jingle from the tags. She lowered her nose, sniffed the silver heart intently. Her nostrils flared, sampling the scent of old metal, and perhaps the faintest, ghostly whisper of lavender trapped with it, the scent from decades before she existed. She didn't recoil. She didn't try to paw at it. She simply accepted it. A new weight, a new presence against her heart. She looked up at me, blinked slowly, then turned and walked back to her sunbeam, the locket glinting softly with each step. Looked, right? A small circle of history, of love, now carried forward, not locked away, by the creature who had loved him last and most fiercely. Later that evening, while Pearl slept, the locket rising and falling gently on her chest, I returned to the drawer, putting the letters, Duke's collar, and the embroidered handkerchief back felt like tucking cherished memories into bed. As I lifted the bundle of letters tied with the faded blue ribbon, something fluttered out. Not a letter, a smaller, thinner piece of paper, folded tightly. It must have been tucked inside the ribbon, hidden amongst the thicker envelopes. Curious, I unfolded it. It wasn't Granny Martha's handwriting. It was Grandpa's. Firm, slightly spiky, unmistakable. Dated, not decades ago, but only a year back. Martha dreamt of Duke last night. Clear as day. Silly old lad was chasing butterflies in that meadow behind Henderson's old barn, the one that flooded every spring. Remember? He'd come back covered in mud, grinning like a fool, and you'd scold him while I hosed him down. He loved that. Missed that mud. Missed that grin. Miss you scolding. Pearl's asleep on my lap as I write this, purring fit to shake the windows. Funny creature. Not a butterfly chaser, my Pearl. More of a sunbeam connoisseur. But she's good company. Solid. Keeps the silence from getting too loud. Makes me think, maybe Duke sent her. After the floods, comes the calm. Different, but good. Still miss the mud, but the sun's warm too. Tell Duke, if you see him, there's a sturdy garden bench here with his name on it. Whenever I'm out there, pulling weeds, I feel him, thumping his tail. Silly old lad. Still here. We all are lost. In the quiet places. In the sunbeams. In the purring. Boys. Tears blurred the careful script. Not tears of fresh grief, but of a profound, aching recognition. He'd written to Martha years after she was gone, sharing his present, sharing Pearl, sharing the enduring echo of Duke. Comparing the boisterous joy of his dog, the mud, to the quiet, steadfast comfort of Pearl, the sunbeam. Acknowledging the different forms love takes, the different ways it endures, the different creatures who carry its weight and its solace. He'd felt Duke still on that garden bench. And now, I felt him, in Pearl's purr, in the glint of Martha's locket against her fur, in the worn leather of his chair. The final gift wasn't the locket, beautiful and symbolic as it was. It was this glimpse into his private, ongoing conversation with love, with loss. This confirmation that he hadn't just locked his pain away, he'd transformed it. Found solace in the sunbeam, after the flood. Recognized the enduring presence of those gone in the quiet companionship of those still here. Pearl, this small, fierce, sunbeam-loving creature, wasn't just his comfort in his final years. She was the living proof, the furry, purring testament to his resilient heart. His letter wasn't just to Martha. It was somehow a message passed through time, through layers of fur and grief. To me, after the floods comes the calm. Different, but good. I looked at Pearl, sleeping soundly. Martha's locket, a small, silver heart holding generations of love, resting gently against her own. Grandpa's words echoed, soft but clear, in the quiet room. Still here. We all are loved. In the quiet places. In the sunbeams. In the purring. Pearl sighed in her sleep, a soft, contented sound, the locket glinting. The final reveal wasn't a hidden treasure. It was the quiet, purring truth resting on a worn gray cardigan. That love, in all its messy, changing, enduring forms, never really leaves. It just finds new ways, new vessels, new sunbeams, to warm. Winter arrived quietly, frosting the windows with delicate lace and blanketing Grandpa's garden in a hushed, pristine white. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, the silence deep and crystalline, broken only by the occasional crackle of frost-laden branches or the distant call of a lone crow. Inside the house, however, the silence had transformed. It wasn't the deafening absence of before, nor the fragile peace of autumn. It had settled into something deeper, warmer, a quiet hum woven from the rhythm of two lives learning to breathe in the space left behind. Pearl thrived in the winter light. Her smoky fur, thick and lustrous, seemed to glow against the snow-reflected brightness streaming through the windows. She claimed new sunbeams, dragging Grandpa's cardigan from rug to rug like a queen repositioning her throne. Martha's locket, now a permanent fixture beside her brass name tag, glinted softly against her chest, catching the light as she moved. She didn't seem to notice its weight anymore. It was simply part of her, a small, silver heartbeat against her own. She'd developed a new ritual. After her morning wash, she'd pause, lower her head, and gently nudge the locket with her nose. Not obsessively, but thoughtfully, as if acknowledging a companion. Then she'd blink, slowly, and carry on with her day, supervising Liam's coffee making from the kitchen threshold, watching snowflakes drift past the window, or curling into a tight, purring circle on her chosen sunspot. Liam found his own rhythm. The frantic sorting had slowed, replaced by a more deliberate curation. He wasn't packing away a life. He was learning its contours, its textures. He'd sit for hours in the evenings, Grandpa's old leather-bound journal open on his lap, not just reading, but feeling the spidery script, the ink blots, the pressed wildflower crumbling between pages about a long-ago summer. He'd trace the lines describing Duke's antics, the worry over a blighted tomato crop, the simple joy of a shared sunset with Martha. The words weren't just history, they were echoes, resonating in the quiet rooms where those moments had lived. He spent more time on the garden bench. Grandpa's bench. Duke's bench. It stood sentinel under a dusting of snow, overlooking the sleeping garden. Liam would bundle up, breathe plumes of frosty air, and just sit. Sometimes with a thermos of tea. Often with Pearl, who would leap up beside him, tuck her paws under her, and gaze out at the monochrome world, the locket cool against her fur. The silence out here was vast, but it wasn't empty. It felt expectant, like the garden itself was dreaming beneath the snow, remembering the warmth of hands tending it, the joy of a shaggy dog bounding through its paths. Liam felt it too, the thump of a phantom tale Grandpa had written about. It wasn't spooky, it was comforting. A presence. A reminder that love lingers in the spaces it once occupied, in the routines it shaped, in the earth it cherished. One bitingly cold afternoon, Mrs. Henderson arrived, bearing a steaming meat pie and cheeks rosy from the frost. She bustled into the kitchen, her presence filling the space with warm, bustling energy. Pearl, who had always treated her with polite tolerance, surprised everyone. Instead of retreating to her cardigan, she padded over, sat neatly by Mrs. Henderson's sensible boots, and looked up. She didn't meow. She simply presented herself. And when Mrs. Henderson, chuckling, bent down to offer a tentative scratch behind the ears, Pearl leaned into it. Just slightly. A purr, low and rusty at first, then stronger, rumbled in her chest. "Well, hello there, Pearl," Mrs. Henderson murmured, her voice thick with unexpected emotion. "Look at you, my dear. Shining." Her eyes flickered to the locket, catching the light. She didn't ask. She simply nodded, a deep understanding passing between the two women over the small gray cat. "He'd be glad," she said softly, straightening up, her gaze meeting Liam's. "Glad you're both finding your way. And glad she's wearing that." She gestured vaguely towards Pearl's chest. Martha would have loved her. Proper little lady she was. Just like this one, deep down. It was a simple statement, but it landed with profound weight. Liam saw it then, the invisible thread connecting them all. Martha, with her gentle strength and lavender scent, Grandpa with his quiet love and worn hands, Duke with his boisterous joy, Mrs. Henderson, the steady neighbor, Pearl, the fierce, loyal guardian of memory, and himself, the grandson finding his place in the tapestry. They weren't separate stories of loss, but chapters in an ongoing narrative of connection, resilience, and the quiet, enduring power of ordinary love. Later, after Mrs. Henderson had left and the winter dark had settled, Liam sat by the fire Pearl had finally decided was worthy of her proximity, though still maintaining a respectful distance on her cardigan. He held Grandpa's final letter, the one to Martha, the paper smooth under his fingertips. He didn't need to reread it, the words were etched inside him now. After the floods, comes the calm. Different, but good. Still here. We all are loved. In the quiet places. In the sunbeams. In the purring. He looked at Pearl. She was washing her face, the firelight painting her fur in warm golds and oranges, the locket a dark, gleaming shape against her chest. Her purr was a steady, contented rhythm, a counterpoint to the crackle of the logs. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration, a physical manifestation of presence, of life continuing, of comfort found and given. This was the meaning, distilled like winter air. Grief wasn't a wall to scale or a void to fill. It was a landscape to inhabit, vast and sometimes desolate, but also dotted with unexpected shelters, quiet moments of breathtaking beauty, and fellow travelers who understood the language of silence and the weight of memory. Love didn't vanish with the last breath. It transformed. It seeped into the walls of a house, the grain of a garden bench, the scent of old wool, the glint of silver on a cat's collar. It echoed in the purr resonating in a quiet room, a sound that said, "I am here. You are not alone. We remember." Pearl finished her wash, stretched languidly, and then, instead of settling back onto her cardigan, she walked the few paces to Liam's chair. She looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the firelight, deep pools of calm intelligence. Slowly, deliberately, she placed one front paw on the arm of his chair, then the other. She didn't jump up. She rested her chin on her paws, her gaze fixed on his face, the locket warm against the chair's fabric. Her purr deepened, filling the space between them. It was an offering, a quiet, profound sharing of warmth, of presence, of the simple, staggering truth that in the quiet places, in the sunbeams, in the purring, love endured. It was a legacy not of grand gestures, but of small, steadfast things. A tended garden, a shared silence, a paw resting on an armchair, a locket carrying generations of devotion, the unwavering loyalty of a small, gray cat who had loved deeply and learned, slowly, painfully, beautifully, how to love again. Liam reached out, slowly, giving her time to move. She didn't. He rested his hand gently on the top of her head, between her ears. Her fur was impossibly soft, warm. Her purr vibrated through his fingertips, up his arm, settling deep within his own chest. A resonant chord struck in the quiet heart of winter. He closed his eyes. The fire crackled. The old house settled around them, whispering its own stories in the language of creaking timbers and sighing drafts. Outside, the world was frozen, silent, waiting for spring. But here, in this room, with the fire's glow and the steady rhythm of Pearl's breath, with the weight of her head under his hand and the faint, cool touch of Martha's locket against his knuckle, Liam felt an unshakable warmth. It was the warmth of memory cherished, not mourned. The warmth of connections spanning generations, species, and the fragile veil between presence and absence. The warmth of knowing that while endings were real, so was the enduring echo of love, resonating in the quiet places, waiting to be heard, felt, and carried forward. Pearl sighed, a soft puff of air, and nudged his hand gently with her head. The message wasn't shouted, it was purred. It was in the steady beat of her heart beneath his palm, the glint of silver against gray fur, the quiet strength of a small creature who had weathered the flood and found the calm. It was the most powerful truth of all, that love, in all its messy, imperfect, heartbreaking, and heart-mending forms, is the only compass we truly need to find our way home, even when home is forever changed. And sometimes, the guide who shows us that path has 4 paws, green eyes, and wears a locket close to her heart. The story of Pearl and Liam doesn't truly end here. It lives in the quiet moments, the shared glances, the purrs that mend the silence. If this journey resonated with you, if you felt the warmth in the winter room or the ache of love enduring, then please, do me a kindness. Like this story if it touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel for more tales of ordinary magic, quiet courage, and the extraordinary love found in paws and purrs. Share this with someone who understands the language of silent companionship. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story, each one crafted to find the light in life's shadows. Because stories like Pearl's, they remind us we're never truly alone. There's always another chapter waiting, another sunbeam to find, and another heart, however small or furry, ready to walk beside us through the quiet places. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, and let's discover the next unforgettable journey together. Your support means everything. Thank you for watching and for remembering.